Everybody. It's an honor to speak to all the experts on this field that I've been interested in for so long. I'm going to talk for 15 minutes. When I keep going, you can shut me up after 15 minutes. And what I'm mainly going to talk about today is, over the years, I've always wrestled with the idea how to convey this enthusiasm, this subject matter, the connection between music and nature to people, most people, how to get them interested and realize there's something to talk about here. So I'm going to talk very briefly about these two examples. I've sent you all these things, but I'm still going to go over them. If you let me share the screen, Emily, then yes, I'll share some stuff. But basically, I've written various books on music and nature. I put out all this music, appeared in different media appearances, and all somehow unsatisfying. Like you can't get this message through to people. How do you get them to understand that it's actually interesting? And so in the last year or half year or so, there've been some surprising opportunities to push this in directions I didn't quite expect. So now we're going to share the sound, we're going to share everything, see what happens. So I send you all this stuff, but let's just look at this video. We'll start with the paper version. You're all very serious people here. So I was part of this group that put together this special issue, many of you are involved in, of this mysterious journal, Frontiers in Psychology, on song and sign, animals and humans and learning. And we managed to get together people from many different disciplines together. And Emily is involved in this, Hollis, some other people here in this call have written things for this issue that's coming out. And what was so interesting in this project is to really connect people from different disciplines around this issue about animals and humans and learning. And I've always been interested in mockingbird songs. And this is a bird fairly common in the US that people say copies other bird songs, which it does. But it always seemed to me that they actually were composing following very specific rules out of the other birds' songs. And how would we actually, how could you talk about that? And so I thought it was necessary to get together different approaches to human knowledge about bird songs. It's always been one of my themes. You can't just use biology, you can't just use musicology, you can't just use like listening and playing along and improvising. Put them all together, they're going to say different things. For the most complete knowledge, you need to put things together. So we got a field biologist, Dave Gammon, together with Tina Roske, who's like a computational neuroscientist, and me, who plays music with birds, to talk about the mockingbird, what was going on. And this paper, which you can all read, I sent you, is full of these diagrams and comparing birds and very complicated summaries of data and many things that I don't understand in the least. But we wanted to put this in to convince scientists that we were onto something here. They were pretty hard to convince. I think 3 reviewers and 1 editor, maybe even 2 editors, resigned from the project on the basis of this paper and the things that we said. They just thought we were totally off the deep end, totally out there. And we put human music in there, by the way, which is not my idea. It was the field biologist's idea. I didn't want to compare this bird song to Beethoven and throat singing and Kendrick Lamar. That was all his idea. But I sent you the video, but I'll play a little bit of it anyway, because I thought that, even scientists don't like to read these complicated papers. They'd rather watch videos. Can you hear the sound?
People can usually tell when it's a mockingbird they're hearing rather than some other bird. We say the mockingbird mocks. He copies other birds' songs. He mimics them. But that's not entirely accurate. The mockingbird composes very carefully his own song out of the songs of other birds. He does this following very specific rules that until now, no humans have really sat down to figure out. Here are 4 of the basic strategies the mockingbird uses composing his song out of the songs of other birds. These are timbre change, pitch change, stretch, and squeeze. We're going to show you examples of what the bird is up to and compare them to some examples from human music where humans do something similar. So here's an example of timbre change. This is how the bird takes the same phrase and changes something about the sonic quality of each.
Pitch down, slow down.
And another one. You can see in the sonogram some of the timbral qualities that are hard to describe, but they are there. Do humans do similar things? Of course they do. Here's an example from the group Hun Hur Tu, throat singers from Tuva. Okay, then we've got,
of course, you know, this idea is, of course, so basic. Anyone talking about music, any musical analysis, to say what you change the timbre when you make a transition, change the pitch, make it faster, make it slower. It's like the most basic things. Originally, we had 14 things that the birds do when they switch sounds. And then we reduced it to 10, and we decided if we reduced it to 4, we could actually go through these recordings, these long bird recordings, and count the number of times they were doing it, as well as do this kind of statistical analysis that Tina had done before with, let's see, we did it with nightingales before, she's done it with zebra finches, and then we've also done it with butcherbirds, with Ethan Janney, with his graduate research. This kind of analysis that's very statistical, that tries to just look at the qualities of the sound. So you can watch the rest of the video. I sent it, everyone has it, maybe some of you have watched it. But the idea was that even with all the information, all the data, all the kind of scientific things, maybe people would just spend a few minutes watching it being presented. The other thing we did in this paper is, you know, along with the kinds of careful diagrams you see in many of such papers, we also really wanted to point out that, you know, this is just one of the many ways of understanding the phenomenon from nature. So I ended with this quote from the Zen master and poet Norman Fisher that I liked a lot, you know, which is a book that I just happened to get around the same time as working on this, where he says, science lacks humanity when it misses a sense of play and rhyme, when it forgets that I and world are one and there is no knowledge, only discussion, when it loses sight of humankind as nature's extrusion, nature's way of creating paradox, linguistic pleasure, et cetera, where it fails to see itself in every rock and tree and star. And, you know, this, both of my co-authors said, great, of course you're going to put this in. It's perfect. That's exactly what's going on here. But, you know, the reviewers said, what are you trying to like deny science's primacy and importance and rigor by saying stuff like this, you know? And I was saying, like, you know, this is what it's about. You know, you have to recognize that by, you know, that by the combining of these perspectives is going to have a certain amount of tension and a certain amount of, you know, kind of, you know, it's not going to be easy. People are going to say different things. You're going to take this phenomenon and understand it very differently. And so when a musician hears a mockingbird saying, oh, look, you know, he's morphing from one sound to the next. He's squeezing it, changing it, moving it into something else. He's not just copying, you know, a blue jay and then copying a red-tailed hawk. He's whoosh, moving them together. He has this musical idea. And this is what I thought was the most interesting thing. We'll see, you know, it was interesting to get it through this process. Some others of you have written papers in this process, and you see how the reviewers are, I'd say, inherently hostile in a way to this kind of approach connecting music and science. But, you know, a long time ago, I wrote a book about whales and music. And in this book, which is 2008, 1,000 Mile Song, I told the story of how in 1979, National Geographic did a story on humpback whale songs, and they put this sound page in the back, like a little flexible record you could put on a turntable. And they happened to print 10 million of them at once. There were so many copies of National Geographic then. And then historically, it's said this is the largest single pressing of any record ever. That at one point, someone decided to make this many albums. Turned out to be humpback whale songs. So that makes it, it's like the biggest music ever, like a multi-platinum super, you know, whale thing. And so since they did that, I constantly would bother them over the years. You know, you should do a news story, you should do something about what's been learned with whale songs since. And they ignored me for like 15 years or more. Yeah, something like that, 20 years. And then mysteriously, I got a call last fall. Okay, we want to do that story, that whale song story. And we want you to play along with it. I go, really? You actually want to do that? And what surprised me is it was very important for them that there be musical notation in the story. So we want a score of the whale song, and we want to show that it's music using the score, and let's do it. And so the process was intriguing because, how do you get this big corporation that's publishing all over the world in different languages, now owned by Disney, to kind of deal with whale music? And so this is what they came up with. They really went with the idea that showing the notation to convince our readers that it's music, based on the idea that they'd be skeptical. Because the theme of the whole issue is whale culture, oceans and whale culture. And so they said, okay, we want the score. Can you transcribe it? Let's have the exact recording. Can you then play exactly along with it? And in the process, every time I set myself playing bass clarinet along with the score, I couldn't stop myself from improvising or changing it, but being a little different. Every time they complained, nope, we want it exactly, note for note. Like, really? I would never do that with a whale. I'd want to interact and play different. No, it has to be exact. And that's because they wanted to make this case with music and whales together. So, so they're trying these words and concepts, as many of you know, developed for talking about humpback whale song, and apply it to human music. How does it play out? And they used a version of this graphic notation that Michael Deal invented when he and I did this like 6-7 years ago, trying to have something that looked like music but wasn't quite music, recognizing the differences. And then they said, you've got to put it all together and like note play along. We originally had a version of the transcription that was like super longer than it would be written very music. And I said that it's more likely to play this who's magazine. It takes 2 pages, and then so this is how they decided to present it. There's the online version and the printed version, and it's just coming out like this week. So we'll see whether readers sort of are interested in the fact, in this way of presenting this music. And I was pleased and surprised that they really wanted me to play along with this and not just transcribe it, to show that the interaction between human and whale is really part of the story. And I think that's related to several ideas about whales and humans that have come up in recent months and years. First of all, the notion that whales have culture, and that we can understand this culture by studying their sounds in different places. And secondly, that the interaction between humans and animals is an important part of representing them, from a publication that is known for presenting here's nature and here's humanity, that they're now interested in placing these things together. In their Brian Scarry's whale series that's just about to come out, they really put him there as the photographer diving with the whales, not just showing the whales, to recognize that people are making these stories, and kind of in a way agreeing with that Norman Fisher quote, that idea that science is really about, as we figure out nature according to the ways we like to figure things out, we are really putting humanity in there. It's the human presence in nature that's there, witnessing, documenting it. I know the time is just about up. So that's basically what, what I kind of wanted to show here, is this idea that, I think it's a good sign that we're recognizing that humanity and the human way of looking at the world is something not to fear, that when we do something scientific, it doesn't mean taking humanity out, but recognizing that we're always there whenever we comment on and try and figure things out or engage with it, investigate or make music with the sounds of nature. So thanks a lot.
We'll open it up to questions. And I think the way we'll do it, we'll have like 15 minutes of questions for David, then I'll present 15 minutes of questions for me, and then we'll have questions for anybody and everybody for the last 15 minutes or so. So put up your hand or just jump in. There's two screens, so it's a bit hard to see everybody, but either put up your hand in real life or in Zoom life, and one of us will call on you. Or you can, if you want to talk, you can also put it in the chat and we can, I see Gergely has his hand up.
On one hand, I absolutely love this idea of not putting humanity out of the picture, not seeing ourselves as something distinct. Here is nature and there is us. But don't you think that somehow this skepticism of scientists are understandable or justified even? I mean, if you call something music, you don't speak about the thing, but you speak about your relationship to that thing. So scientists may say that we are interested in birds and not in how David Rothenberg perceives things.
Yeah, and so what I would tell to them is, are you really interested in birds? Are you interested in how your statistics can deal with those birds? You think all these numbers and these kind of, mathematical analyses are somehow less human than someone's musical connection. In fact, it's not. It's a human way of making sense of the world, to saying, like Galileo did, the book of nature is written in mathematics. That's a human idea. The book of nature might be written in music. It might be written in flow. It might be written in smells that we can barely grasp. It's one of the many human approaches that has a lot of advantages, but it's just one of many ways.
Any more thoughts, questions, comments? Roland.
Yeah, I like very much the way in the Wales music you presented, that music in this case is a kind of tool to make something recognizable, to make something hearable, with a specific. It's a specific tool to make it visible, to make it perhaps even to make it remarkable. And I think in this point, it's not only a scientific project, but also a kind of engaged science, which you are proposing. And this I find very convincing, that science itself has to be engaged, and art is a way to engage science into the process of coming together, becoming together with, in this case, with whales, in other cases with birds. And I know myself this experience from my work with the nightingales, that I understand the nightingales better when I read poems to them. It's much more. I understand better how they sing after reading poems to the nightingales, not at my home, but down at the river with them in the field.
Yeah, I understand the nightingales better when you read those poems too. And then I think it's pretty clear that many of these poets were listening to the birds, thinking about language, wondering how to connect the two, knowing that hearing a rhythmic language, a musical language being pronounced by birds, and they wanted in, they wanted to be part, they wanted to join in with that. They wanted to find a way in, and that's what they were playing around with.
Tanya.
So thank you, David, for your talk. It was really interesting. And I have a question regarding your article of the whales from Nat Geo. because I have listened to you several times, like improvising and talking or playing music with other species. And I know you have an approach trying to have a dialogue with complex shapes and complex like musical forms. And now I listened to your talk and I saw that that it is pointing more like the pure sounds of a melody in a sense of just the pitch. So my question is, why do you think that, I don't know if it's scientists or I don't know whom, it's always pointing to listen or to focus our human ears into this purity of sound that is, I don't know, I can barely say very difficult to listen in nature. Nature always has these very more complex timbres. And why is always trying to point our listening into this simplicity of pure sounds?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that's exactly why National Geographic said, none of that improvisation, none of that weird stuff, just play the notes. Like you transcribe the song, just play the notes. I mean, stick to the score, please. And literally that's the third, or I think it's the fourth version. It was so hard for me to follow the rules, you know, to be exactly doing, because they wanted to make a musical case that listen to this whale sound, here's the same thing as a musical note, isn't it music? They didn't want to promote the idea of this interaction, this more, you know, musician's approach. And so, you know, I was amused. First, I was amused that they wanted to put musical notation in National Geographic and our readers are going to get this. I said, maybe they will. And then I said, yeah, let's do it. But then I also, it's not what I would have done. You know, it's not what I would present as the, and yet I played it for many people and many of them have said, this is so much better than your other work of this type, you know, like I really get this, you know. So it is quite interesting, you know, and I wouldn't do this instead of what I'm usually doing, but if this is what they want, I'll do it for them, you know, see what happens, see how people react. I hope someone listens to it and writes a critique saying, this is the most boring response to a whale that I've heard. And, you know, surely Rothenberg can do better.
Great. Martin.
David, thank you so much. And I think Swiss philosopher Markus Wild would call that animal mainstreaming. What you're doing right now, animal mainstreaming.
I like that, yeah.
But my question is a bit off topic, but I just take the opportunity to tap into your knowledge. What puzzles me is when our whale vocalizations are framed as a song and when as language. And isn't this actually a very, very blurry line? Did you come across that?
Yeah, over the years, yes. I mean, you know, they tend to be framed as language when people talk about social back and forth, you know, sounds made by, you know, smaller toothed whales like belugas and dolphins, the sperm whales also, they're making clicks and sounds back and forth to each other. It's more like they're talking. And the humpback whales also in the summer when they're feeding, they talk like this, social sounds. But in the winter, the males make these long performances, beginning, middle, end, structured, go on, the whole thing's 20 minutes or so, and they start again, and then again. It's like a song, you know, it's like a musical performance. They're just performing. It's unclear who's listening. They tend not to change what they're doing in response to other animals. This is seen more as like a song. And, you know, yesterday I shared this story with Scott McVeigh, the man who discovered this structure in 1969 and wrote very poignantly in a scientific paper, the humpback whale emits a series of surprisingly beautiful sounds. Which I told him, as he knows well, no other scientists mention beautiful sounds when they're doing whale science papers. You know, why is that? You know, and so he did say that some people objected at the time also. They weren't so pleased with that line, but they insisted on leaving it in. So that's kind of the simple view. It's same with birds. You know, a bird's song is a performance. Bird gets up there, does this long performance, like a mockingbird, and then you know, a bird call is they talk to each other about things with very specific meanings. Nobody really knows what the meaning of the mockingbird song is, but there's a mockingbird alarm call, you know, a lot of birds use when there's something they don't like that's around. So that's kind of where the difference tends to come in. Of course, there are people pointing out it's a very soft difference, not such a hard one.
Jack, and then Hollis next.
Hi, David. I would love to hear more about the mockingbird and maybe about the reception history, if you could call it that, of the mockingbird. So I'm wondering whether there might be some kind of connection between this sort of devaluing of the mockingbird song based on the fact that it is sampling all these other kind of bird songs and then recreating its own song from that. And does that kind of relate to maybe like Western art music ideas about musical originality, what's original, what's not original, and therefore what is valuable, not valuable?
That's a great thing to investigate. I'm sure some of the name of the mockingbird is trying to insult him, but on the other hand, it's clearly like the best bird song in North America. Like it's clearly something very incredible and amazing, and has been celebrated by poets, most famously Walt Whitman, Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. You know, he wrote in a rhythm of the mockingbird song, it's kind of palmanock, 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 all this kind of, you know, very beautiful, intense poem.
What year was that poem?
What's it called? I mean, it's in Leaves of Grass. I don't know.
Which,
you know,
well,
I don't know.
because this is actually going to relate to some
Yeah.
of my talk later, so I'm curious to know more about.
You know, it's in there, and then it's like he's praising the bird, he's praising and celebrating everything, and so, but people over the years, scientists have certainly said, what is it wrong with these birds that they can't learn their own songs? They have to copy. This must be an easy way to generate a more complex repertoire rather than developing your own thing. But you know, anyone who carefully listens to mockingbirds realizes they don't just move from one imitation to another. They very carefully, you know, musically move in a way. They're morphing in this way that's very perceptible. It's not hard to hear this. Like the brown thrasher has more songs, like 1,000, but it just repeats in pairs. This one, then this one, this one. It goes on and on and on, and you're not lured into it musically as easily. It just seems like a lot of repetitions. You know, similar in some ways to the song thrush isn't as beloved as the blackbird or the nightingale because it's just repeating these things in groups. The mockingbird has this musicality that I was actually surprised people hadn't really studied before and thought was worth quantifying the way scientists like to. But you're absolutely right. Part of the reception is not liking this. What is this annoying sound keeping me up at night? You know, and yet I think people also admire them. You know, they're also, they deserve more celebration. They probably should have a different name. Mockingbird sounds a little bit negative. They could, maybe it's time to cancel that name and with another name. And there are some good ones in other languages, but you're onto something there. There's definitely a sense of and the general literature in birdsong science about mimicry is suggesting that it's easier than coming up with your own variety. That easy way to add some variety to your song, copy some stuff you've been doing. And so that is kind of like sampling. And they're also like, you know, certainly one of the original samplers because they really make music out of this. And when we made our bird sound sample pack for Splice, this pack is based on just 4 individual birds, 1 lyrebird, two nightingales of different species, and 1 mockingbird. And we have like hundreds of sounds just from these 4 individuals, all put together to be sampled and remixed and used by electronic musicians.
Hollis.
Thanks, David, for a terrific presentation as always. I'm just wondering if you could unpack a bit more your experience with the scientific reviewers, who you called inherently hostile, because as you know, we haven't talked about it really in much detail, but that was absolutely my experience too. Mm-hmm. And I mean, are we still stuck in these kind of prestige differentials where the humanities has no real voice, or a voice that's a very, you know, second cousin?
Yeah, I mean, I was, you know, my fellow authors, at least Dave Gammon, said, oh, it's always like this, you know, you must just not be used to this. And he also was very interested in figuring out, you know, he said, oh, the guy who's editing this paper, I know him, you know, and you know, he's afraid to directly say anything negative to me. He's going to find people who are going to be negative because he wants to, but he's afraid to. And he eventually dropped out, the editor. He refused to have his name associated with this, even though some of his reviewers eventually said, okay, these people did rework their paper, you know, it's okay, we're going to do it. He was getting uncomfortable by the whole process. and I was sort of peripheral to that. And Tina, as a neuroscientist, she just, she said whatever. They're always like this, and they're not really getting what we're doing, but we'll change some stuff for them. And now this paper is being proofread. I have a feeling it's being proofread by bots. Like the proofreading is not based on any intelligence, and so we're wrestling with that. I don't know if you have that problem.
Yeah.
Like they're not really reading it; they're just they're computing our paper and things like that. But it's kind of amusing. I think the process is very. I think this particular journal is a little unusual, but they did let us do this, so that's
Yeah, I guess I was lucky. I had really helpful reviewers and
that's good. Yeah.
So yeah, some of them are here.
Yeah, some of them are here. We know who you are. Now we know who everyone is.
It says on the papers.
The names are released except for those that drop out.
Right. That's true. Who knows how many fell by the wayside? And
they want everyone to approve the papers. I think it should be like 2 to 1. This was approved 2 to 1, and someone should be on record as completely disliking it.
Right. It's true. Great. So
sorry, Tanya says it's going to be published like next week if the proofreading bots communicate. If they understand.
Yeah, there were some weird edits that I had to undo.